Hello, and welcome to Building and Maintaining Trust During Change. I am Catherine McKernan of Path to Trust, and I am pleased to have Greg Brown with me today. Greg is not only my mentor, he's the author of Ready, Set, Change Again. Take control of change before it takes control of you. Greg loves taking neuroscience and making it practical in our day-to-day work lives. He was part of the groundbreaking team that opened the first wave of Starbucks stores in Canada. He has a strong interest in organizational and behavior change. He worked with one of the most difficult groups of people to change, hardcore prisoners. Greg has worked in large multi-generational organizations, both private and public sector, with frontline workers through to CEOs. He is a sought-after speaker. Greg holds a Master's of Social Science degree from the University of Leicester in the UK with a focus on organizational psychology, leadership, and performance in an associate member, and is also the associate member of the American Psychological Association. So I'd like to welcome Greg as our guest speaker today. But before Greg gets started, I'd just like to point out two ideas that you can use. We will be doing some interactive activity throughout the webinar. So on the bottom right hand of your screen, there is a Q&A button. So please use that to respond. And secondly, if you have any technical issues whatsoever, please email me at catherine@pathtotrust.com, right on the screen. So before we might as well get started. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Catherine. I hope everybody can hear me well. Catherine, can you hear me well?
I can.
Perfect. So welcome, everyone, and good morning to some of you, because I know there's some folks from the West Coast here. Good afternoon, lunchtime to those of you in the Eastern time zone, and I think we have a few folks that are way out on the East Coast, and so good late afternoon to you all. I'm really excited to do this webinar for you for a few things. So I've always thought about trust as being very black and white. And I either trusted someone or I didn't trust someone. And I didn't really have a gray area in that. I worked with Charles Feltman, I guess it must be 3 or 4 months ago, and he mentored me in some of his work and really spending a lot of time with me to learn it so I could teach it, train it, and speak on it, because that's not really the type of work that he does. He focuses much more on coaching. And so through Catherine's company, I was willing to take this on, and I had some really good insights that I want to share with you today. So a couple of things we're going to do in our 30 minutes together. We're going to look at a definition of trust. We're going to talk about what it means to trust wisely. We're going to frame this all in the context of change, because many organizations, and I'd probably say every single one online, goes through change probably all the time right now. And last but not least, we're also going to look at the 4 domains of trust and what those actually look like. So there's some guiding principles just to start us off. So organizations, among other things, are what I like to think of as networks of conversations. The capacity to have, these powerful, effective conversations drive success, especially during change. Now, the deal is trust is a precondition for these types of conversations. Trust doesn't just happen. And we really know that it takes conscious intention and attention. And when we build and maintain trust, it's really like gardening. You really have to tend to the trust that you have with the people that you work with. Just like you would in a garden, you got to pay attention to it. You've got to think about how your behaviors impact others, how theirs are impacting you, how you're allocating trust. The only way to build, maintain, and repair trust, in my experience, and certainly what Charles has found in his work, is that it needs to be supported by a shared framework and language for building trust. It requires that we extend trust wisely, which we're going to talk about, and act in a way that is worthy of the trust of others. Now, one thing to know is trust is not an end in itself, but a means to an end. So it's really that currency that helps us get our work done, especially during change. So Since we're talking about change and trust, what I'd like for you to do is I'd like for you to think about a recent change initiative that you've been around or leading or, as a team member on, and think about someone who you've had trust issues with. It could be a colleague, coworker, someone inside your organization, outside your organization, a vendor potentially. It could be your boss, it could be executive, it could be whoever. And I want you to keep that person in mind as we go through this, because I'm going to ask you to assess them when we get to the 4 domains, which we'll get to in about the last 15 minutes of our webinar together. So take a moment and just think about that. So what I would like for you to do in your question box down at the bottom, I want you to put the answer to this question, and I'll read some of them out as they come in. How does change impact our ability to trust? So trust can be, given and taken away really easily, but of course during change, other things happen that impact our ability to trust. Why don't you type in some responses, and I'll read some of them out to answer this question. How does change impact our ability to trust? So yeah, it takes us out of our comfort zone. You have to learn new things. So if I could get you to type in a few more responses. Creates doubt. We don't trust ourselves at these times. Makes us uneasy. I have to give of myself. Too many unknowns. Isn't that the truth? We want to be able to predict the future. The priorities might impact us negatively. And conversations also can become harder. And of course, if there's going to be a potential negative impact to someone, that would definitely make the conversation a lot more difficult and require us to have some trust. So let's look at our next slide here. We're going to skip these. So trust is defined as choosing to risk making something you value vulnerable to another person's actions. Now, what we know about trust is that it seems very easy to give, and it can also seem very easy to take away. But what we know is that being trustworthy begins with a moral decision to be worthy of others' trust. And it doesn't stop there. People decide whether or not to trust someone based on their behavior, what they say and do. Also, other people are looking at you at the same time to decide if they can trust you. Trustworthiness is always in the eye of the beholder. And that's something for us to keep in mind as we go. And obviously, if we were doing the half-day or full-day workshop that we offer, we'd be going much more into detail around this, but I really want you to get a flavor of what this looks like. So let's talk about trust versus distrust. So distrust is the assessment of what is important to me is not safe with this person or this situation. So think about during meetings you've been in or during change initiatives that you've been on. Sometimes you'll walk into the meeting trusting everybody in the room or a good significant number of people in the room, but there's a couple of people there you might not trust. And you're asked your opinion on something, and you don't really want to be honest with your answer because you don't feel safe sharing that answer. It might be because they might do something differently with it. It might be because you're not sure what they're going to do with the information. You're not sure what other people are going to do with the information. But what we know is that trust produces more distrust, or distrust produces more distrust. And the moment we begin to distrust another person, we start trying to protect and defend ourselves. And of course, we start looking for evidence that begins to support that. So let's talk about the brain science around this. Brain science is near and dear to me because I love thinking about what is the physiology and what is the psychology and how they intersect to make us work. So we are wired to trust and we're wired to distrust. Trust predisposes us to connection and cooperation. And of course, distrust predisposes us to protect and defend and support. They both of them work and support our survival in different ways. So if you think about, let's just simplify this. You got three parts to the brain. You've got your cognitive layer. Underneath that, you have your emotional layer. And the oldest part of your brain, right at the back of your brainstem, is what we commonly call the lizard brain. And that's your fight or flight. Now, when that kicks in, your amygdala kicks in. It actually pumps cortisol, adrenaline, and other chemicals into your brain that actually allows you to make immediate split-second decisions without having to think too much about it. So let me give you an example of that. If you are, pardon me, if you have a child playing in the driveway and there's a car coming, not in the driveway, sorry, on the road. Pardon me. If you have a child playing on the road and a car is coming, you're not using your cognitive brain to go. You're not using your cognitive brain to go. What distance is it from the car to where the child is? I wonder what the velocity of the car is. I wonder how long that's going to be. I wonder what that's going to look like. You're not doing that. Your lizard brain is kicking in quickly and you're not using any cognitive thinking skills. You're going to grab the kid right out of the road before they get hit by a car. That's a good thing. You want to have that to happen. Now, the thing is, at work, we don't want that part of our brain driving how we make decisions and communicate to others. So when we're trusting someone, we're using more of our cognitive and emotional brain, but we have this normal to elevated level of oxytocin. The full availability of your thinking brain is engaged. That's why when you're able to build trust during change and build trust at meetings and build trust in dialogue, that you actually get to bring your full brain to that meeting and think really well. As soon as distrust starts to happen in the meeting, your thinking brain starts to dwindle down and you're not using it as much, and that emotional brain and lizard brain are clicking in because it's all about how do I protect myself versus how can we solve the problem? How can we deal with things that are happening in our day-to-day world? What questions do you have about that brain science piece? If there's any, please pop them into the Q&A. We're on the brain science slide. If you have any questions about that, by all means, pop those in and I'll get to them. I'm not seeing any, so we will go on to the next part. So let's talk about what it means to trust wisely. So trusting wisely is really about exercising the capacity to assess the trustworthiness of others as accurately as possible while recognizing you're not going to get it right every time. Now, what we know is this, and think about yourself as I talk about these, and think about which side are you on. Some people tend to extend trust to others easily with little or no evidence that it's warranted. And that would be me. So this is how it works. If I'm interviewing someone for a job and I like them and I begin to immediately develop that trust with them, I can make a bad hiring decision because I have no evidence to support it. But I am that type of person who likes to extend trust first. And I do withdraw it if my trust is betrayed. And I withdraw it fast, and you're really going to have a hard time getting it back. Other people believe that trust must be earned and that their trust has to be earned by demonstrating trustworthiness. So you've got two types of folks going on here. Some might be you, some might be others. Now, I did have a question just back at the brain science piece. question from one of our panelists: do people you've explained this to have a hard time accepting this lizard brain truth? Actually, no, because your amygdala is actually it's in your body. It's a gland in your body that is at the top of your brain stem. So lizard brain is just sort of a colloquial term that we use because it's the oldest part of your brain, and it's the one that has been developed over thousands and thousands, if not millions of years, I guess, for us, we've developed and grown. So yeah, no, people haven't had a hard time accepting it. I think because as well, when you give specific examples of fight or flight and people not thinking clearly, they quite get it. So in the workshop, we actually go into a lot more detail on that. But thank you for asking that. So let's go to me, which is a big nugget for this program that I really love. Trust is not black and white, which I always thought it was. Trust is not an all or nothing proposition. This is, to me, the biggest nugget that I want you to take away with today, other than the 4 domains. Wise trust can be conditional. It can be specific to the 4 domains that we're going to talk about. And you can limit it in terms of time and scope. So we can actually, instead of just blanketly saying, I trust someone, you can trust them based upon how they work with some people, how they not work with some people. It might be based on some conditions you put in place. It might be limited just for a period of time that you're working with them and you don't trust them in other areas. And it could also be given to them based upon the scope of the work of what they're trying to do or the scope of what you're talking about. That's why we do hear people say, I trust them in some ways, but not in others. And this was a really big light bulb for me, and certainly some of the other folks that I was working with on this. So let's get into our meat and potatoes, our 4 domains of trust. Now, what I'd like to do as we go through these is I'll set up the context for them, but as we go through each of them, I'd like you to think about the person I initially had you talk or think about when we started the webinar. So the person that you were thinking in your head, who you work with when you're going through change and you don't really trust them. So go back to that person, or if you have someone else in your mind, that's fine. And I'm going to describe each of these to you, and I want you to assess that person on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being low, 5 being high, where they fall on that scale. So just to talk a bit about how assessments work, you're going to need to think about observed behaviors that you've seen, or actions, or maybe actions and behaviors that other people have told you about that they've seen about this person. And it just could be assessments by other people that we trust. So I want you to take that whole ball of wax when you're thinking about this person as we're going through each of these. So let's talk about the 4 domains. So the first one is sincerity, and that is the assessment that you are honest and you act with integrity. And this is the one that I love this. You say what you mean and you mean what you say. You can be believed and taken seriously. So I never really thought about, sometimes I don't trust people in this domain because they're telling me a bunch of falsehoods that I know are not true, or their body language is not matching their nonverbals. Yet you can trust people in this, that, hey, they mean what they say. So I want you to rate yourself, the person that you're thinking about, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being low, 5 being high, where they fall in the sincerity domain. So do they mean what they say when they talk to you, or not? And you can use decimal points if you have to. So take a moment to do that. The next one I want to look at is reliability. So if sincerity is you do what you say what you mean and you mean what you say, reliability is you do what you say you're going to do. So this is about the action. You can count on me to deliver what I promised to deliver. And if you think about people you've worked with over the years, you might have trusted them in reliability, meaning whatever they said they would do, but they weren't necessarily sincere about some things. You may have had a lower score with them in sincerity, meaning you didn't believe some of the stuff that was coming out of their mouth sometimes. So they might have had a higher score in reliability and a lower one in sincerity. So rate your folks on a scale, whatever you're thinking about, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being low, 5 being high. You can use decimal points. Next one we want to look at is competence. I love this one because it's not just saying I know what I can do, that you have the capacity, skills, and knowledge to do what I'm doing or propose to do. Competence is also being clear about what you don't know how to do. And we often don't talk about that when it comes to competence. It's not just about what we do. It's also about, I know that I can't do that, or I'm not sure if I can't do that. Because people, I've worked with people who are super competent in their jobs. They know what they're doing. And during change, and we know competence can shift and change during change because we have to learn new skills, new behaviors. I've had people I've worked with who are like, oh yeah, I know everything, and they jump right in, and then it backfires. I've also had people when they're encountering change and we're looking at, they have to do something new or act in a new way or learn a new behavior, where they're like, you know what, I'm really good at this, but I don't really know how to do that. Can I get some guidance or coaching or some support to do that? That is what true competence is. It's knowing your limits and also being able to assess what your capacity, skills, and knowledge are and resources are. So rate the individual you're thinking of on a scale of 1 to 5, where you think you might fall. 1 being low, meaning, yeah, they're not competent, and competent meaning they know what they can do and they know what they can't do. Or 5 meaning, yeah, they can look at both. So the last one we want to look at is care. Now, care does not mean let's hold hands and sing Kumbaya. Care means that we're putting the organization's interests and the team's interests ahead of our personal agenda. It means that you have the other person's interests in mind as well as your own when you're making decisions and taking action. So it's really about that team mindset. It's really about the organizational mindset. I've worked in organizations where I have had to make decisions that might not have benefited me as well as it could have, but that's better for the organization to do. Or I've had to have conversations with people that I think need to have happened that based upon the organizational policies that might not have been what I wanted. But that's what care means. It really is putting the interests of the individual and the organization over your own. So you can also think about it's also a way to support other people's interests. So a score of 1 on this, so a low score, so the opposite of care would be complete self-interest. So, I've worked with people who, it's all about them. So I would probably rate them on 1 on this, even though I might have rated them high on all the other ones. So 1 is complete self-interest, and a 5 on care would be definitely, putting the organizations and the team ahead of your own. So rate your person on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 being low, 5 being high. Okay, let's look at some simple tips to build each of these. So obviously, again, in a workshop or a keynote format, we're going to go into these in a lot more detail and tailor them to the individual's issues that they're dealing with. However, what I love about this is there's practical ways that we can build these domains of trust with people. What's interesting to know is that people will often, before they understand the different types of domains, they'll say, I don't trust someone, and they start building trust with that person, but it's not in the domain that that person doesn't trust them in. So they'll think, oh, maybe I need to build trust with them, and I'll do what I say I'm going to do. So they're thinking there's an issue with reliability, and yet the person that they're doing it for, which might be their boss, the boss is actually it's the sincerity that's an issue. But what the research has found is that we tend to build in the wrong areas. when we don't know what those domains are. So that's just something to keep in mind. So let's go through yours and think about your low and highs. And these are some specific pieces that you can do to build trust in this domain and to maintain it. And of course, don't forget, it's all about the gardening. We want to nurture it. So for sincerity, so for those of you that had a lower score in sincerity with the person that you're working with, you can give them this tip when it's appropriate, or if you're overseeing them. This is really something that you can do as a leader during change. Check with people regularly to make sure you're aligning expectations with intentions. And that's very, very true in my experience during change. Because remember, sincerity is always about, do you mean what you say? So it's always about checking in to make sure expectations and intentions are working. Then we've got reliability. You can count on me to deliver what I promise. I do what I say I'm going to do. So when you're dealing with people in change and you're either allocating resources or work is being allocated to you, when you make offers to other people, be clear about what you will do and what you won't do. And we know this from working on large scale change initiatives. You know, how this principle aligns to it is you always talk about what's in scope and you always talk about what's not in scope. So it creates clarity about the work that we're going to do. Next, we have competence. When you don't know something, say so. Ask for help, clarification, or whatever was needed to perform what was asked. And so as someone who leads change initiatives, I want to make sure that I create that capability for people to say, I don't know the answer. And that can be hard. If I'm working with an executive team, they're less likely to maybe put up their hand and say they don't know something. We're working with emerging leaders, there's this need to learn, and they might be more open to it. I'm generalizing, of course, but that's just an example. Last but not least, care. Remember, care is all about we're all in this together versus self-interest. When you make decisions or take actions, let people know you understand how it affects them. And this is the key point for all of those of you that are leaders on the webinar today. Even if the effect is adverse, you have to be able to talk about the negative aspects of the change and let them know that you understand it. Understanding and acknowledging it does not mean you need to problem solve or fix it. So keep that in mind. You're all really good problem solvers or you wouldn't be in your job. But what we know is when we just acknowledge and understand the situation for that person will build trust with you that way, even if you can't fix it. So that is a 30-minute quick and dirty walk through our very comprehensive trust program. I feel like that, if any of you are old enough to remember that show, Name That Tune, sometimes I feel webinars are like that, where we try to get as much information as we can, but useful information for you. So I hope that this has been of use to you. Catherine's email is on the last page. I'll turn this over to her to wrap up in a second. Feel free to reach out to her. My email is also there, greg@gregbrown.ca. And I have also my Twitter and Instagram handle there as well, or you can go to my website that has some more information on this. So thank you so much for taking your time today to help us talk about trust. Remember, trust is conditional and can be given and removed with time, scope, and based on each domain. And remember that there's some simple ways that you can actually build trust in the various domains. Catherine, over to you.
Thank you, Greg, so much for sharing your knowledge and insight with us today. And just to let everybody know that I will be sending a recording of this webinar out either today or tomorrow. And I'd also, Greg has been so kind to do a series of webinars. So our next webinar, I invite you to join Greg and myself for on August 30th, again, 12 to 12:30. And he'll be exploring how to build trust through everyday conversations. So I will, like I say, send you out the links and the webinar links for the next invite. And thank you, everybody, for your time. And I look forward to seeing you again on August 30th. Take care.